Before we get started with the show, I wanted to remind you that the Phase 2 cover letter course is available. If unfortunately you only got one or two interviews and you're just not sure that it's going to happen, or maybe you unfortunately didn't get any interviews at all. But one thing that I know that many of you have asked me for help with is the presentation. And I do help those that are in the interview course with their PowerPoints and making sure that those PowerPoint presentations are what they need and obviously that they're accurate, but also there's a lot of things that I can help you with in terms of what should go here and what should go there. But the one thing that comes with that is you're going to make your presentation. They're going to ask you some questions. How do you answer things on your feet? And what Cory Jenks does is a great job of explaining the process of answering questions on your feet, just going for it, just no hesitation, because if you hesitate, all of a sudden doubt kind of creeps into your mind, not only in the people that are watching you, but also in yourself. Or if you canned your presentation, that is, you prepared every single moment of it and you can't remember a small part of it, it derails you. So Cory gives a number of tips on exactly how to do those presentations and how to think on your feet, but also demonstrate that empathy that's so important with his new book that we talk about as well. So enjoy the show. Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I'm here with Cory Jenks, who is a pharmacist and improv comedian, speaker and author, and his book just came out on Kindle last week. Well, actually a couple days ago, and will be coming out in hard copy and print as well. So welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here. Recording this bright and early here.
Yeah. So if you guys don't know, it's 7:45 in the Midwest, and I completely spaced that it would be a little bit earlier, probably in Arizona. So we'll talk about his journey a little bit. So Cory, tell us a little bit about, where you did go to pharmacy school. You're about a decade into your career. I'm a double decade into my career, so we'll be able to kind of compare and contrast a little bit. But most of the people listening are just about to start their residency career, so they'd be especially interested in how did you get a residency? How did you like residency? And how did you turn residency into a job?
Yeah, so I used to be a new grad, so I could be relevant to the young kids listening. But I graduated pharmacy school from the University of South Carolina in 2011, and I'm originally from Tucson, so I obviously made the logical choice to go across the country for undergrad in pharmacy school.
Yeah.
I love me some student loans and out-of-state tuition. But no, I'm a proud Gamecock. But after my time there, I realized I really liked home, which is Tucson, so I wanted to come home. I knew I wanted to do a residency, and I guess looking back that decade plus since then, to get into a residency for me meant I really put a lot into pharmacy school beyond grades. I mean, I got good grades, but I was active in different organizations, made connections with preceptors who wrote me letters of recommendation. So making sure that I was a little bit more outgoing and getting involved in that in that pharmacy school experience to make me competitive, and also honestly, it made pharmacy school more fun. The more I got involved, it wasn't just living test to test. There was events and organizing different things. And I would also say part of this was cultivating other interests and skills and hobbies besides pharmacy, which was one of the best pieces of advice I actually got in my last rotation, which was an academic rotation. The assistant dean, shout out to Dr. Wayne Buff at the University of South Carolina. He said, next week is your last week on rotation before you graduate. I'm going to have some advice for you next week. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait. He's going to give me the secret to pharmacy.
Yeah.
And I show up and I said, all right. He's like, all right, I got the advice for you. And it's like, okay, is it pharmacology? Is it? And he's like, find a hobby. I was like, what? No, I've been doing this for 6 years. And he was known for his gardening and flowers. That was his hobby. And it didn't really sink into me. But anyway, I graduated, kind of put that in the back of my head. And I'd always had this little interest in comedy. But anyway, I came back home, got applied for residency at the VA here in Tucson, Arizona, where I did my residency and stayed on after I was done. Again, during my residency, made sure I was really involved, worked well with the preceptors, tried to just not be a pharmacy robot, but to really enjoy the time there. I hung out with my preceptors and co-residents outside of pharmacy, again, cultivating those non-pharmacy interests. And when the time came to finish my residency and go look for a real job, there was a job that was like a non-super clinical one there at the VA, but it was a foot in the door. and I said yes to it. And since that time, I took that. They hired me on, and since that time, I think I joke that I've done about every different job at the VA here in Tucson, including landscaping and teaching Fight Club. So we have a disruptive behavior class that I teach. So that's the joke, is I teach Fight Club. So that's my journey, and along the way, I think, again, cultivating those interests outside of pharmacy. So I had awesome preceptors who were pharmacists, but also that I play golf with, that we play sports with, play kickball, do all these different activities. And so that, I think, led to a richer experience and made me want to stick around there. And I think I will, I will, I guess, to my home a bit, but when someone's hiring you, they're hiring you because they want to work with you. And I guess they decided that I was someone they'd want to have stick around and work with. So that's the nuts and bolts of my pharmacy school and residency journey. Now it's been a decade, and I've worked in, as I said, inpatient, outpatient, ambulatory care, which I do now. So I've been bounced all around the place.
Okay. Well, I feel like when somebody thinks, oh, he's a comedian, it was somebody that wasn't good in school, so he used comedy. But I think, didn't you have like a perfect 4.0 before going into pharmacy school?
I did. You're putting me on the spot here as a nerd, but yeah, I had a 4.0 in undergrad, and I got a 4. I'll say it. I earned it, I guess. Like at the time, I'm like, oh man, I want to get these perfect grades, and I'm almost like ashamed. Like I should have gone to like more concerts and maybe got like a 3.8 and 3.9. It would have been fun. But yeah, I had a 4.0 in undergrad in pharmacy school, and there was actually, speaking of comedy, when I was an undergrad, there was an improv comedy group at University of South Carolina that I went and watched with my friends, and I'd always enjoyed comedy, and was like, I was blown away. I'm like, oh my gosh, I could do this. But then I was like, no, I got to be a pharmacist. So I got to go to the library. I can't, no time for these extracurricular activities aside from the intramural sports that I played. So it was really, I was a good student and I enjoyed like making little jokes to my friends next to each other in class. But I was hyper focused on the pharmacy path, which I'm blessed at the place I'm at now with my career. But I think there is something to be said about enjoying the journey a little bit more, looking back along the way.
Yeah, I think that it's always, either or, but it sounds like you did a great job of making it both and. And
Mhm.
what I do want to do though is kind of talk about your book, which came out a couple days ago, and talk a little bit about how I want to talk specifically about chapter 8 and then chapter 9.
Mhm.
And chapter 8's titled "Go Deeper, Not Wider," because when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And
Mhm.
so it's, although it sounds like you're making more than one thing a priority, pharmacy school was clearly the priority at the 4.0 and all that. But
Mhm.
so was your own mental health, I guess you could call it, by having a hobby, by having other things. So can you take us through chapter 8 and give us a little bit of a summary, and then kind of go over how you do that? How do you go deeper into a specific thing that you want to be known for, but then
Mhm.
also maintain that mental health balance?
Yeah, and I think this is just, we don't have enough time to get into the weeds of improv comedy, but chapter 8's a lot about this concept as an improviser. And just as a quick background, improv comedy is a form of comedy where everything is made up on the stage. So it's not like a stand-up comedian where I have jokes. I get up with a team, get a suggestion, and we try to make things up that are funny. And one of the concepts is going deeper, not wider, which is the whole goal is to, as we're creating this thing out of thin air, identify one interesting, funny thing and then explore it. Versus a lot of times when we get on stage with someone who's new, we try to make things up. We really try to be funny. And so the way I relate this to healthcare is, I think we both work in a world where there's a bunch of competing priorities. And so if we're able to identify one, two, maybe, at the most three really important things, whether it's, for me, working with a diabetes patient, making an intervention, saying, trying to change everything right now would lead to failure because you might be overwhelmed. But if we could focus on one or two things to do really well, that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. And the same is with any sort of initiative coming down from management in a pharmacy. If there's a million competing priorities, then nothing's going to get done. And so what I've done in my career, and what I, as applying this idea as an improviser, is let's pick one or two things that I really want to focus on to do really well, not ignoring the other options completely. But like, for example, I love comedy. So I've been doing this journey where I wrote this book, where I go and speak to organizations. I have my day job. I have two toddlers, which is awesome, but they take a lot of time. And I have a lot of other interests outside that I've just had to say, well, I would love to develop a metabolic health practice, to help with diabetes, but I can't do that right now because I'm writing a book. And that's okay. Just being at peace with, I'm going to go really deep into a couple of things and do them as well as possible. And I think that also helps with the mental health and wellness side of things, because when you have 1,000 plates you're spinning or juggling them, whatever metaphor you want to use, spinning plates or juggling
Sure.
things in the air, you can't focus on anything. And I think we get frazzled and fall into some of the bad habits and bad habit loops that we can get into. So, and that's what I've really tried to take from the stage into my career, into the side hustle that I'm doing.
Okay, well, we hear a lot about imposter syndrome as students try to go towards residence, and even residents in residency. The first couple of months, they're like, how did I get accepted? I don't belong here. What is going on? I just had in my head that, it'd be kind of a curriculum, it'd work out, and the fire hose of knowledge just hits them right in the face.
Mm-hmm.
But tell me a little bit about chapter 9 and going forth. And you have kind of a neat, 2-minute thing on kind of change the accent, best place that you would want to vacation, and things like that. But I think a lot of times students will apply to a couple places that they feel are safe for
Mm-hmm.
residency, but won't go, that extra, well, it's going to be a waste of money, which is kind of a sour grapes way of putting it. But, oh
Yeah.
man, well, I'd have to pay an extra, $30 to apply to that one, and they'll never accept me anyway. But
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like you're saying, well, actually do the opposite and kind of go for it and see where you go from there. But tell me a little bit about chapter 9 and getting out of your own head and just kind of going forward.
Yeah, I think pharmacists, pharmacy students, pharmacy residents, listen, if you're listening to this, imposter syndrome is real. Like, I felt the same thing when I graduated pharmacy school. I sometimes still feel it. I'm 10 years into this thing, and I talk to people that have been doing it 30 years, and they're still like, I don't know how they hired me or how I'm still doing this. So I think that doesn't always go
Yeah.
away. But pharmacists, if you're listening to this, you're smart, you're good. I can't emphasize this enough. I thought it was a cliche when people would come talk to our pharmacy class and say, you guys are way smarter than us. You don't even have an idea. And now I'm 10 years into it. I'm like, oh my gosh, these student pharmacists coming through with these residents, like, you guys are really good and you're really smart. So please accept that. But pharmacists, because we're smart, we like to really think things. We like to overthink things. We like to analyze things. And we can get this paralysis by analysis. And I think that's something I struggled with early in my career. And I graduated in 2011, finished residency in 2012. I started doing improv in 2013. And one of the tenets of improv is you just got to live in the moment and just go. We call it follow your foot. If you're thinking about doing a line or stepping into a scene and your foot twitches, that means you need to go and just do it and don't think too much about it. And I think that, like, I'm not saying don't ever think about what we're doing when you're practicing. Of course, we have to be safe and follow the guidelines and use our knowledge. But whether it's making an intervention with a limited amount of data and just going with your best recommendation based on the limited data that we can have, or whether you're worried about, if I apply to this residency, they might not accept me. If you think of something like $30 in the span 10 years later, it's something that could be literally life-changing. And so with improv, like our main thing is to say yes and to just go. And so with that imposter syndrome, we get a lot of self-judgment, and that what I've learned is if you can just live in the moment, help to acknowledge that fear, but just go. Because when you just go and you stop thinking, even if the answer that you're trying to provide isn't the quote right answer, you're going to learn from it more than if you just sit in your head and overthink it. Like, I distinctly remember I had one of my best students ever. We would go through cases and she would be unsure of something, and I would say, just give me your best plan that you would do for this patient, or give me the best answer for what you think this medicine would do. And I loved working with her because she would give totally wrong answers. And I'd say, oh, we wouldn't do that, but here's why, and here's how we would learn. And that's where you learn and get those rich life experiences as well. So it's easy to say, hard to do. And I think the longer you practice, the older you get, the easier it is to see. But that's really the philosophy that I try to do, is to get out of my own head and just go forth, because then you're going to learn something, get a reaction, and then keep moving forward with that new information.
Yeah, I've heard tech startups, and when they talk about things, they're like, we're not failing fast enough. We need to fail faster. We need to get through these iterations so that we can do it. And I think that, having that kind of mindset of, okay, it's okay to fail. It's okay to, that's why we're here. We're here to learn. Well,
Yeah.
let's kind of go backwards. Many students want to have a publication, and
Hmm.
I've even worked with one student to have them write a small book. But let's
Hmm.
talk about actually becoming an author and how you not only carve out the time to do it, but
Hmm.
how did you come to the title? Because that's always tough. But
Yeah.
permission to care, building a healthcare culture that thrives in chaos. So, how did you start as an author? How did you come to the title and kind of get through the process?
Yeah. So I'll start with how did I become an author? And so this goes back to that idea of just go we just talked about. So 2020, beginning of 2020, 2019, I'd done my first speaking engagement that where I got compensated for it, which was really cool. And I was like, all right, 2020, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do some more speaking, maybe do it for free, get some footage, start to build a client list, build some testimonials. And then I think we all know what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
COVID hits, and this
Yeah.
idea of like being a professional speaker, it's like no one will get this reference because you're all too young, but the record scratch. Uh, so uh, so I guess the choice there was I could sit and wallow in my frustration and this thing beyond my control, or I had been jotting down ideas and had a rough outline of like, oh, it'd be cool to write a book about this, and idea of like writing blog posts or articles. And so the time that I was going to be spending emailing prospective people to talk, to speak with, that I would be going out on the road and speaking, I said, let's write a book. Let's use this time, this thing that's, the bad thing that's COVID, and use it to an advantage to have this book written so that when the time comes and I'm ready to publish a book, I'll have a draft. And so that's how I decided to write the book. And really, it was a lot of, I had at the time just one kid. My second kid was born in June of 2020, so right in the middle of the pandemic.
Oh
But
man.
um, the time between end of work and picking him up from daycare, I get 20 minutes. Well, I think we all, like as an author, I would love to go sit secluded in the woods for like a week and just pound out my book. That's not an option. So 20 minutes, I really had to learn to turn the focus on, write as much as I could, just go again, getting everything out without the judgment of the self of like, this is a stupid idea. Why would I write this? Just like get the ideas out. And so by June or July of 2020, I had the manuscript, and then got connected with a publisher in 2021 and was able to send them the whole draft manuscript. So I was able, I wasn't like I had to start from scratch when I was ready to write the book. And the goal as a speaker too, for me, is I want to establish myself as the expert on this. And there's not a ton of pharmacist improvisers. So really cornering the market there. And then the idea of permission to care, building a healthcare culture that thrives in chaos, I really have to give my publisher a lot of credit. The brainstorming process for coming up with the title was probably one of the most painful parts of my book, because I think I have a Google document of like 80 proposed titles, and none of them were permission to care, building a healthcare culture that thrives in chaos. But this is, again, the lesson I hope your listeners take is I had 80 bad titles, but those 80 bad titles helped to inspire my publisher and their team to come up with I was blown away when they came up with the title, because with permission, the main title, permission to care. I think we get into healthcare because we want to take care of patients. Uh, I will say we run into a lot of red tape as pharmacists and healthcare professionals as well. And improv comedy, our main rule, if you learn nothing listening to this, is that yes and is the main rule. We agree and we build together. And we get a lot of no's in healthcare. And so a lot of times we just want to do the right thing for our patient, but that culture doesn't allow that yes to happen. So I want to build a culture that gives us permission to actually care for our patients. And then building a healthcare culture that thrives in chaos. If COVID hasn't taught us anything, is that we control way less than we like to think we do in healthcare. And so the chaos will always be there, whether you're working an inpatient and there's a code blue, whether you're myself in AmCare and a patient comes in who hasn't eaten in 4 days and is homeless. And so diabetes is the last thing that they care about. They just want somewhere to live and somewhere to eat. There's always going to be chaos. So rather than trying to control the chaos, which I think a lot of pharmacists were very left brain, type A, we like to have things a certain way. And
Yeah.
I've been that way in my life. The sooner you can give up that control and embrace that the chaos shall happen, is the moment you can thrive. Because when you can accept that this is beyond our control and you develop the tools to roll, the roll with the punches kind of cliche is true. And think of for you, the students and the other pharmacists and doctors you work with that just seem unflappable are the ones that are probably like, this is just another day, versus I think a lot of the anxiety and frustration comes from like, well, it should be this way, but it will never be the way. Like, someone will always call it sick. So there's always going to be a drug shortage. So we might as well just accept it and do our best. And I think that's where that secondary title came from for the book, because it provides a lot of the tools, both from a management and culture standpoint and an individual standpoint, to deal with that.
Awesome. Okay, so we've kind of gone through a little bit about residency, a little bit about the book, but let's talk about public speaking. I think that when students are going in for their residency interviews, they're thinking, okay, about the interview part, and they forget that the case is maybe a third, and then the presentation is a third. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you have for a student doing a presentation? And then maybe talk about how you've talked to some student groups before, and maybe you could, I've talked to SNAFA. I think I was at the national meeting this year talking about residency. And then a couple of the honor societies, I've talked to them as well about getting a residency. But if you can talk specifically about succeeding in a presentation to a bunch of people who are a little bit further than you or a lot further than you in their journey, and kind of not being intimidated by that, and just understanding that this is your place. They just want to see that you're going to be able to present to the staff, the nurses, the physicians, and the other pharmacy staff there.
Yeah, I think that is the public speaking. And when we get our new residents every year, that's one of the biggest things that are on their to improve on list or wish list to get better at. And I think the success in any presentation, and having participated in resident interviews, is owning whatever it is you're presenting. Because no one even though people are further along in their journeys than you are presenting, think of the time and effort you've put into any presentation. And I remember doing a presentation for a job interview, and like, you're the expert. I say own that expertise. Also enjoy it. Like, think of this amazing opportunity you have to share this harder knowledge that you worked so hard on to share with this group of strangers who will hopefully be coworkers. I help precept our CE presentations for our residents, and that's what I try to get across. Is an hour-long talk seems super daunting, but I say you've studied this more than anybody, and so if you can own it, and it sounds crazy to say, but enjoy it. You have worked so hard to get to this spot. And yes, the stakes are high for what you'd like to do in your career. But that again goes back to this idea of chaos and being beyond your control. All you can control is how you're going to present yourself. And I think that some of the best interviews I've experienced are people that aren't presenting at me. They're talking to me. They're having a conversation. And that's what I get across to student groups as well, is that we have this knowledge, and we're on Zoom, so I'm looking at myself in the video, but like, you have this stuff here in your brain. I'm pointing at my head. I have to point a lot because my brain's kind of tiny compared to all you students, but you have all this stuff in your brain, but a lot of times you're not able to communicate it with your mouth. I'm flapping my mouth here to make people care about it in their heart. And because you're rolling stuff off robotically, like you've memorized it word for word. I'm an improviser. I hate scripts. I also, like, as a pharmacist, I don't like demeaning the profession by calling prescription scripts. So I have a vendetta against the word script. So I think being relaxed and being able to not trying to have the big beats of what you're trying to say, but if you're locked into word for word, the moment you like mess up a word, you freak out because you're like, oh crap, where do I find myself? So having that ability to have the big picture you're trying to present, and then like try to smile when you present too. Like I feel a lot of people. Like, a lot of times you see people presenting and they have the deer in the headlights look. But when you're presenting to nurses, doctors in your careers, have a conversation with them, see each other as equals, and try to have that audience perception as equal as well.
Yeah, I've heard if you're happy and you know it, tell your face. Yeah.
I've never heard that before, but I'm gonna tell my 4-year-old that.
Oh, well, they've told me that, because I'll come home and they're like, you're happy, and I was like, oh, all right, I'm not mad at you. It's not you at all. Okay,
right.
All right. So, well, let's talk about a little bit about maybe a presentation that you've done, and talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of it, and who would benefit specifically from presentations that you've done or that you can do.
Yeah, so I have a few different presentations I do. I have a keynote address that I give that I've given to a number of pharmacy organizations. And I think that's a really great way to kick off a conference, because it goes through the focus of building an adaptable, empathetic, and humanizing healthcare experience. And I think any organization is probably dealing with some level of burnout. And what I do with that talk is go through a little of the background of improv comedy, but then a lot of stories with patients and family members of creating a great healthcare experience, because I think that that is something that is within our control. We don't get to control the diagnosis of what happens to our patients always, but we can always provide them an amazing experience that even on their worst day, we can make it, hurt a little bit less. And then I have a couple of presentations that are more hands-on workshops. So that keynote, like I said, I've kicked off a couple of conferences, done some general sessions, and it's really well received, a lot of fun for the audience. But then I have a couple of presentations that are a little bit more hands-on, where I give some background. We do a quick improv lesson. I'll do some literature. There's actually literature to support the use of improv comedy in healthcare training. So pharmacists love evidence-based medicine. So I do evidence-based comedy. And then we get the audience.
Sorry, just wrapping my head around it.
Yeah, for evidence-based comedy. I nerded comedy up as much as I could. So, but I think, again, I have a couple of different ones that are more hands-on. One's a Improv RX 101, where I just do a quick 10-minute overview of improv, and we just spend the rest of the time playing together. And then I do putting Yes and to work. And that one is a little bit more of the evidence-based presentation. And again, we still get hands-on and get to play. And I think for student organizations, they love the hands-on stuff. I've done the hands-on for other large professional organizations. And I say I got to give props to students. You're much more open-minded when I'm starting this to get people to volunteer. But even with the professional organizations, for people who have been working for 10, 20 years, once we get going, what I love seeing is the amount of smiles on faces for people who are doing things that are uncomfortable to do. So we go back to that fear of failure. Improv is wonderful because there is no such thing as failure. There are no mistakes. There are only gifts. So everything that is said, we see as a gift that we can turn and build and turn into an amazing scene. And that's the atmosphere I really try to create with my talks. Is I think that again, I'm not discounting the fact that we need to get things right when we're doing pharmacy. But I think, especially for students, you're so worried about grades. Mr. 4.0 over here was super hyper focused on grades. And so to then go into an improv class after 7, 8 years of training and be told, you say yes and there's no wrong answers, was like freeing and mind blowing. And so I think that's where students and those of us practicing for a long time get a nice, breathe a sigh of relief, because you can go and try a thing that's hard, that's going to help you grow, but not have you worry about the consequences of that interaction whatsoever.
Okay. So I want to kind of dive into the details of ambulatory care. So we've kind of gone through your journey, but now tell me a little bit about being a competent ambulatory care pharmacist. I know that many of the people that listen are thinking, should I do a PGY2 in ambulatory care? Should I get board certified? How in the world do I get these patients to take their medicine? I mean, it just seems pretty simple. You'll get better. If you take the medicine, you'll take it, right? And it just doesn't work that way. My wife also works for the VA in a bit of a different role. But tell me a little bit about how you've developed your competence over the last decade, although you've worked in many different areas, that particularly ambulatory care.
Yeah, I think that the competence in ambulatory care is twofold. I think obviously you need to know the nuts and bolts of the disease states and the medications you're using for those disease states. So I'm primarily doing diabetes, hypertension, smoking cessation, and some lipid management. And so I've become independent of my comedy career. I've really dove into on my free time the science behind metabolic health and lifestyle interventions, as well as the medications. So one, you got to know your stuff. Like I have the AmCare board certification, so that objectively means I'm qualified. So I think that's a big part of it. But I think the thing that you mentioned otherwise, if you just take your medicines, you'll get better. Well, not everyone wants to take medicines, or they'll take them sometimes. And so I think a big part of the ambulatory care competence, and something that I think really drew me after my time as an inpatient pharmacist, realizing I really like talking to patients, is something that I'll say I learned on an improv stage is to find their why or their want. So every patient has a want. Maybe it's to be left alone. Maybe it's to be able to see their kids graduate from high school or college. Maybe it's to still be able to eat ice cream and have their blood sugars under control. So a lot of that involves developing the rapport with your patients, being able to quickly connect with them. And I think that's something where I feel more confident in my ability to converse with patients. And to me, that means making like that presentation discussion we had, making it a conversation and not a, like, I'm telling you, this is what you have to do. Because I have patients where we're going to talk about their pigs, their chickens in their garden. I have patients where I talk about their YouTube channel. I have patients where I talk about football. But amongst those conversations is where I'm dropping in oh, when you watch football, your blood sugars are higher. What are you eating when you watch football? Oh, football season's over. Oh, NASCAR's starting. Okay, great. Well, we need to deal with this. And like they just want to sit and watch football on Sundays. Okay, great. Well, 6 days a week, we're going to be fine. What are we going to do on that other day? And meeting the patient where they are. And I think that's what I enjoy about the challenge of ambulatory care is having that unique situation with every patient that walks through the door that I call on the phone, to not only be doing the medication management, but a lot of human management as well.
Well, I guess I'm just kind of taken aback by the how the job itself should be so straightforward, but it takes so much going outside of pharmacy to make the connection with the patient, and then you can kind of come back to the medicine. But if you don't go outside to that part of it, then you kind of lose them many times, and then it's just over, I think.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit now about the VA itself, as much as you can or can't tell me. But I know that many people really, really look at it as a VA as kind of the pinnacle of being able to practice at the top of their license. That the VA, the rules are kind of a little bit different at the VA in terms of your ability to do certain things, especially since you don't really. You could have had a South Carolina license, right, and still practice at the VA.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. But tell me a little bit about the VA system itself and what they're looking for when they're looking for a future resident.
Yeah, I think the VA is great and it's unique and it's a highly coveted place to work. Is it pharmatopia? No, but no place is pharmatopia. There's no perfect place to work. But I think when we're looking at the VA, the unique thing is that I think pharmacists get to do what I do is I can prescribe medicines. I am the provider on that prescription model. That's not something that you can see in a lot of other settings. I think, and it could vary facility to facility. I know with ours, like when the pharmacist isn't there, the teams are like, well, what's going on? I need my pharmacist. And I think you get to play a really integral part of the medication and healthcare process at the VA. And so when the VA is looking for someone, and I'm not a hiring manager at the VA. I'm just a simple pharmacist who does comedy sometimes.
Okay.
But I think what we're looking for are those folks that, of course, you got to have that clinical knowledge. But and this could be the VA or anywhere. It goes back to, do I want to work with this person? Is this going to be a good fit for the team? Are they a good team player? I think having that ability to be a good team player, to communicate well. I think lowering your own ego is something that is important. I think pharmacists are really elevated at the VA, but sometimes that intervention needs to come from the physician, and that's okay. Or the nurse notices something, and that's okay. For me, I think that's a big part of being a successful pharmacist anywhere, but looking for those that can use that clinical knowledge, communicate it, and have that patience too with our population that has served our country and had to go through a lot, and being able to have an empathy for those who are struggling with whatever downward effects of their service could be.
Okay, so I've asked you a bunch of questions. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would want to tell the audience out there? Mostly people trying to become residents, those that are residents, RPDs, and then some students who are thinking, should I do residency? Should I not?
Yeah, I think that you got to follow your instinct and follow your gut. So whether you're thinking about doing a thing or you're thinking of hiring someone, we have all these objective measures, but I think it comes down to, does your gut say you want to do a residency? My advice is, if you're thinking about it, just go and do it if you're going to be a new grad, because you're still in that mode of learning and you're still in that kind of school mode. We've had people that have been practicing for years that have come back and done a residency and done great. But my opinion is to follow your instinct and do it. And also, I think, do something that you care about. Don't do something because someone said, well, this will be an in-demand specialty or an in-demand thing. Oncology is amazing for those who do it. I won't say never. It is not something I see myself wanting to do. But if someone's like, well, oncology will be a really in-demand thing, don't do it because someone says that. Do it because you really want to make an impact with your career. And also, I would say, don't be afraid to try things. Like I said, I've had like so many jobs because I couldn't figure out what it is I wanted to do. And ultimately, I'm like, my clinical specialty is comedy. Like now, okay. And that's okay. Like, don't be afraid to be a little unique too. Because I think that's something that when I'm talking to a prospective person I might be working with, when I hear that they've ran with the Bulls or they've managed a fast food restaurant, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And I'm sure you learned a lot of really great life skills that'll be applicable to whatever job you're going to be doing. So don't be afraid to show that unique side of yourself and to do things outside of pharmacy as well. Like that amazing advice I got was have a hobby. It's okay. I think that those hobbies, you never know how they'll help cultivate your career and send you in a path. Like for me, Rick, writing a book, like I would never have thought I would have written a book about comedy in healthcare, but here I am talking about it with you this morning, and it's pretty cool. So it shall unfold, not as you think it will, but I think it'll be fun. So don't be afraid to have some fun, try new things, and follow that instinct.
Awesome. Well, the book is Permission to Care: Building a Healthcare Culture That Thrives in Chaos. Kindle is available now. Hardcover and paperback are coming out on the 15th of February.
Yeah.
And if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, maybe about a speaking engagement or something like that, what's the best contact information?
So if you just go to my website, CoryJenks.com, that's CoryJenks. Yeah, my parents were cheap. They didn't buy a vowel in Cory. There's no E. So it's just CoryJenks.com. Or if you from there, you can find all of my social medias. You can find you can email me from there. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to follow up with anyone that heard this and was like, you're interesting. I want to learn more. I'm happy to do that as well. So, and I really appreciate, I want to thank you for having me on as well. Thank you for taking a shot on this weird guy that does pharmacy and comedy and checking out my book too.
Well, if you're friends with Tim, friends with me. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the Pharmacy Residency podcast.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. Again, if you need help, residency.teachable.com, or if you want to talk to me directly, TonyThePharmacist@gmail.com.